Sometimes the land we call home isn't truly ours until we've bled for it. And sometimes even that isn't enough. Runa Nash had spent 15 years in the Montana mountains, turning wild ground into something that could sustain her. When a storm hit last chance, and she found an old man collapsed outside the saloon, she brought him to shelter. His name was Halder Pike. She gave him food and warmth until the weather cleared. 3 days later, he told her the truth. The land she'd worked all these years belonged to him. Every fence post, every turned row, every dawn she'd risen to tend it, all on his property. But he'd known she was there. He'd always known. So why had he let her stay? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains had a way of holding secrets. Runa Nash understood that better than most. She'd come to Last Chance, Montana 15 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag, a truck that barely ran, and a determination to disappear. The town sat in a valley where the pines grew so thick they blocked out the afternoon sun, and the winters came hard enough to kill anyone who wasn't paying attention. It was exactly what she'd needed. Her property, or what she'd believed was her property, sat 3 miles outside town proper, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that became impassable during heavy snow. The cabin was small, maybe 600 square feet, with a wood stove she'd rebuilt herself and windows she'd replaced pane by pane over the years. She'd found it abandoned, half-collapsed, the roof caved in on one side. The first winter, she'd lived in her truck while she worked on making the cabin livable. By spring, she'd had walls that didn't leak and a door that actually closed. The land around it was rugged, unforgiving. She'd cleared a 1/4 acre for vegetables, built raised beds from salvaged lumber, and learned through trial and error what would grow at this elevation. Potatoes did well. Carrots, turnips, hardy greens that could handle the frost. She kept chickens in a coop she'd constructed from old pallets and wire fencing. They gave her eggs most of the year, and she supplemented with hunting when she could. Deer, occasionally rabbit. She'd learned to can, to preserve, to make things last. It was a hard life, but it was hers. Or so she'd thought. Runa was 56 now, though people often guessed older. The mountains aged you faster than city living ever could. Her hands were scarred and calloused, her face weathered from years of sun and wind. She kept her dark hair, now streaked heavily with grey, pulled back in a practical braid. She wore the same rotation of flannel shirts and work jeans, patched and repatched, until they were more repair than original fabric. She didn't speak much. When she came into town for supplies, she exchanged pleasantries, but nothing more. The people of Last Chance had learned to respect her boundaries. She paid her bills in cash, kept to herself, and caused no trouble. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Runa Nash remained largely a mystery, but there were people who'd earned a measure of her trust. Though she'd never have used that word, Bridget Moss owned the general store, a weathered building on Main Street that sold everything from dry goods to hardware. Bridget was in her mid-60s, round-faced and warm, with an uncanny ability to know what people needed before they asked. She'd been one of the first to speak to Runa kindly all those years ago. Never prying, never pushing, just offering a steady presence. Over time, Runa had come to rely on those brief conversations while picking up supplies. Bridget had a way of making you feel human again. Owen Kelsey ran a ranch about 5 miles north of town. He was in his early 60s, broad-shouldered and quiet, with silver hair and deep-set blue eyes that seemed to take everything in without judgment. He'd helped Runa a few times over the years, once when her truck broke down on the highway, another time when a late spring blizzard had caught her unprepared, and he'd shown up at her cabin with extra feed for the chickens. She'd never asked how he knew. He'd never explained. There was something between them, unspoken and careful. The kind of connection that develops between two people who've both been hurt and learned to move slowly. Then there was Tommy Reese, barely 23, who drifted into Last Chance 2 years back looking for work. He was tall and gangly, with an eager energy that reminded Runa of a pup that hadn't grown into its paws yet. He helped out around town doing odd jobs, and Runa had hired him occasionally for the heavy lifting she couldn't manage alone. Fence repairs, splitting firewood, hauling supplies. He was a good kid, honest and willing, and she'd grown fond of him in a distant, protective sort of way. These were the extent of Runa's social connections. It was more than she'd had in her previous life, and more than she'd expected to build here. The morning the storm came, Runa had been working on the fence line. One of the posts, the first one she'd ever carved by hand, a marker of her claim to this place, had started to lean. She'd been resetting it, digging deep into the rocky soil, when she noticed the clouds building over the western peaks. Dark and heavy, moving fast. Montana weather could turn in minutes, and she'd learned to read the signs. She'd secured the post as quickly as she could, gathered her tools, and headed back to the cabin. The chickens were already agitated, sensing the change in pressure. She got them locked in the coop, brought in extra firewood, checked the shutters. By the time the first drops started to fall, she was inside with the door barred and a pot of coffee on the stove. The storm hit hard. Rain came in sheets, driven nearly horizontal by wind that howled through the pines. Thunder rolled through the valley like artillery fire, and lightning turned the afternoon bright as noon every few seconds. Runa sat by the window, watching. She'd weathered worse, but there was always a small thrill of fear during storms like this. A reminder that nature didn't care about your survival. You either respected it or you died. After about an hour, the worst of it passed. The rain continued, steady and cold, but the wind died down. Runa realized she was low on coffee and down to her last candle. She'd meant to restock yesterday, but had gotten caught up in work. Now seemed as good a time as any to make the trip to town. The road would be muddy but passable if she was careful. She pulled on her heavy coat, worn leather, dark with age and use, grabbed her truck keys, and headed out. The drive into Last Chance took 30 minutes on a good day. Today, it took nearly an hour, navigating ruts and washouts, the truck's tires struggling for purchase in the mud. But she made it, parking in front of Bridget's store just as the afternoon light started to fade. The store was warm, lit by oil lamps since the power lines were down. Bridget looked up from behind the counter and smiled. Figured I'd see you. Storm like that, everyone runs out of something. Coffee and candles, Runa said, shaking water from her coat. Got both. Power's been out since 2 o'clock. Probably won't be back until tomorrow. Runa gathered what she needed, paid, exchanged a few more words about the storm damage. She was heading for the door when Bridget called after her. Runa, wait. The older woman's voice had changed, taken on a note of concern. If you're heading back past the saloon, could you check on something? Old Finn said he saw someone collapse outside about 20 minutes ago. He was going to check, but his hip's been acting up. Runa paused, hand on the door. Her first instinct was to decline. She didn't get involved in other people's troubles. That was the arrangement, but she found herself nodding. I'll look. Thank you, dear. The saloon was 3 buildings down, a squat structure with peeling paint and a crooked sign. As Runa approached, she saw him. An old man, collapsed on his side in the mud just beyond the building's overhang, rain still pelting down on him. He wasn't moving. Runa's heart kicked. She ran the last few yards and dropped to her knees beside him. He was alive, breathing but barely conscious. His lips had a blue tinge, and his whole body was shaking. Hypothermia setting in. She checked for obvious injuries, nothing she could see, and made a decision. She got her arms under him and hauled him up. He was lighter than she'd expected, bird-boned and frail. She half-carried, half-dragged him to her truck, got him into the passenger seat, and wrapped him in the emergency blanket she kept behind the seat. Then she drove, as fast as she dared on the muddy roads, back to her cabin. Getting him inside was a struggle, but adrenaline gave her strength. She got him onto her bed, stripped off his wet clothes, and covered him with every blanket she owned. Started a fire in the wood stove, got it roaring. Put water on to boil for broth. Only then did she really look at him. He was old, late 70s at least, with thin white hair plastered to his skull and a face full of deep lines. His hands, resting on top of the blankets, were gnarled and spotted with age. There was something dignified about him, even unconscious. Something that suggested he'd lived a full life and carried its weight with grace. She didn't know who he was, had never seen him before, but she'd saved his life tonight, and now she was responsible for keeping him alive. Runa Nash, who'd spent 15 years avoiding connection, found herself keeping vigil over a stranger. The old man slept for 2 days. Runa checked on him regularly, making sure his breathing stayed steady. His color improved. She spooned broth into him when he was lucid enough to swallow, kept the fire going, changed the blankets when he sweated through them. She didn't know what else to do, and the nearest doctor was 40 miles away, over roads that were still washed out. On the second night, he developed a fever. Runa stayed up with him, placing cool cloths on his forehead, listening to him mutter in his sleep. He spoke in fragments, broken sentences that made no sense. Names she didn't recognize, places that might have been real or imagined. Once he said very clearly, "Eleanor, I'm sorry," and his face crumpled with such grief that Runa had to look away. By the third morning, the fever broke. She woke to find him watching her from the bed, his eyes clear for the first time. They were grey, the color of worn stone, and they held a sharpness that surprised her. "You're awake," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Have been for a while," he replied. His voice was rough, damaged by the fever, but there was strength underneath. "Didn't want to disturb you. You looked like you needed the rest." Runa stood, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "You were sick. Hypothermia and fever. You're lucky to be alive. I'm aware." He tried to sit up, managed it with effort. "I'm grateful. You saved my life. Found you outside the saloon. Storm nearly killed you." He nodded slowly as if remembering. "I was trying to get to the boarding house. Didn't make it. What were you doing out in that weather?" "Being foolish. Old habits." He looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the orderly way she kept her space. "This is a good place you have here. It serves. How long have you lived here?" Runa hesitated. She didn't like personal questions, but the man had nearly died in her bed. 15 years. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe recognition. Long time. Must know the land well. Well enough. He was quiet for a moment, then extended his hand. "I should introduce myself." "Halder Pike." She shook his hand briefly. His grip was weak but deliberate. "Runa Nash." The change was immediate. His eyes widened, and he stared at her with sudden intensity. "Nash, your family name is Nash?" "Yes." Wariness crept into her voice. "Why?" Halder seemed to be struggling with something, an internal debate playing out across his weathered face. Finally, he reached slowly into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small object. A silver pocket watch, tarnished with age. "What's your grandmother's name?" he asked quietly. "Why do you want to know?" "Please, it's important." Runa crossed her arms. "Eleanor." "Eleanor Nash. She died 20 years ago." Halder closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. He held out the pocket watch. "Look at this." She took it reluctantly. The watch was heavy, old-fashioned, with an inscription engraved on the back, HP and EN. The hands were frozen at 3:47. "I don't understand," Runa said. "Eleanor Nash was your grandmother." "I already said yes." Halder took a shaky breath. "She was the love of my life. This land you're on, this cabin you've built, it all belongs to me. I bought it 60 years ago in 1951 with the intention of bringing Eleanor here. I was going to marry her. We had plans." Runa's hands went cold. "What are you talking about?" "Eleanor's family didn't approve of me. I was poor, a drifter, not good enough for their daughter. But I loved her and she loved me. I worked 3 jobs for 2 years to buy this land. I was going to show her, prove I could provide for her. But before I could tell her what I'd done, her father forced her to marry another man, Bernard Nash, your grandfather." The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in. Runa set the pocket watch down on the table with careful precision. "You're telling me you knew my grandmother. I loved your grandmother. And when I heard she'd passed, I started looking for her family. I found records that led me to you. When I learned you'd settled here on this exact piece of land, I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought maybe it was meant to be, that somehow Eleanor had found her way home through you. You're saying this isn't my land? Legally, no. It's mine. I've held the deed for 60 years. Runa felt the floor shift beneath her feet. 15 years. She'd spent 15 years building a life here, believing it was hers through right of labor and persistence. She'd cleared the land, rebuilt the cabin, turned wilderness into a home. And all along, it had belonged to someone else, to this man who claimed to have loved her grandmother. Why? The word came out harder than she'd intended. Why didn't you say something when you found out I was here? Why let me work this land, build all of this, thinking it was mine? Halder met her anger with quiet sorrow. Because I saw what you were doing. I saw someone who needed this place as much as Eleanor once did. And I thought, he paused, choosing his words carefully, I thought this land was meant for Eleanor. If I couldn't give it to her, maybe I could give it to her blood. To you. That's not how it works. Runa's voice was shaking now. You can't just let someone build a life on your property and then show up years later claiming ownership. That's cruel, Halder supplied. Yes, I know. But I never meant to claim it. I came back to sign it over to you. Properly, legally. That's why I'm here. Runa stared at him. Nothing made sense. The watch on the table, the story about Eleanor, this man's sudden appearance in her life, it was too much, too fast. I don't believe you, she said. I don't know you. You could be lying about all of it. I have documents, back at the boarding house. The original deed, correspondence with Eleanor from before she married. I can prove everything, even if you're telling the truth. You can't just give me this land. I didn't earn it through you. I earned it through my own work. Yes, Halder agreed. You did. But the law doesn't care about that. The law says this land is mine until I transfer the deed to someone else. I'm trying to make sure that person is you. Runa turned away, staring out the window at the land she'd thought she owned. The fence posts she'd carved, the garden bed she'd built, the path worn smooth by her feet over 15 years of walking the same route every morning. None of it was hers. Not really. It never had been. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. I'll go back to town as soon as I'm strong enough. Give you space. No. The words surprised her, but once she'd said it, she knew it was right. You're still recovering. Stay until you're well. Then we'll figure this out. Halder nodded slowly. Thank you. For everything, Runa didn't respond. She walked out of the cabin, out into the cold morning air, and stood looking at the mountains. They were unchanged, indifferent, eternal. They didn't care who owned the land beneath them or why. They simply existed. She wished she could find that kind of peace. But all she felt was the ground crumbling beneath her feet, and the terrible knowledge that nothing in her life had ever truly been her own. 3 days passed in careful silence. Halder recovered slowly, gaining strength but still too weak to make the journey back to town. Runa maintained her routines, tending the chickens, working in the garden, avoiding the cabin as much as possible. When she came inside, they spoke little. The revelation hung between them like smoke, visible, choking, impossible to ignore. On the 4th evening, Halder broke the impasse. I'd like to tell you the whole story, if you're willing to listen. Runa was cooking stew over the wood stove. She didn't turn around. I'm listening. I met Eleanor in the summer of 1949. I was 22, working construction in Missoula. She was 19, visiting an aunt. We met at a dance. His voice took on a distant quality, remembering. She wore a yellow dress. She could name every bird by its call, every wildflower by sight. She was the most alive person I'd ever met. Runa stirred the stew, said nothing. We fell in love that summer. It was the kind of love that felt inevitable, like we'd been moving toward each other our whole lives. When she had to go back home to her family, we promised to write. We did, for over a year. Secret letters, because her father wouldn't have approved. Why not? Because I was nobody. A laborer with no prospects, no family name, no money. Her father had other plans for her. A banker's son, established, respectable. Bernard Nash, the name landed like a stone. Runa's grandfather. The man she'd known only as a cold presence in family stories, dead before she was born. I decided I needed to prove myself worthy, Halder continued. I took on extra work, saved every penny. In 1951, I bought this land. 300 acres, including this cabin. It was run down even then, but I saw potential. I was going to fix it up, make it beautiful for Eleanor. Then I'd tell her what I'd done, ask her to marry me, but you didn't. No. Before I could, her father intercepted one of our letters. He confronted Eleanor, gave her an ultimatum. Marry Bernard immediately or he'd cut her off completely. In those days, that meant everything. No money, no support, no way to survive. She was 19 years old. Runa finally turned to face him. She chose Bernard. She had no choice. Halder's hands were clasped tightly in his lap. I didn't find out until weeks later. A letter came, but it wasn't from Eleanor. It was from her sister telling me Eleanor was married, asking me to stop writing, to let her go. For her sake. So you left. I left Montana. Spent the next 30 years drifting. Worked all over the country, never stayed anywhere long. But I kept this land. Paid the taxes every year, kept the deeds safe. It was all I had left of what might have been. Runa served the stew, set a bowl in front of him. You said you have correspondence with her. But if she married someone else, how? Years later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Eleanor's life wasn't happy. Bernard was controlling, cold. He gave her security, but not kindness. I wrote to her once, just to say I still thought about her, that I hoped she was well. She wrote back. Just one letter, telling me she appreciated the thought, but that I should forget her. That she'd made her choices and had to live with them. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small photograph, faded and creased from years of handling. He slid it across the table to Runa. It showed a young couple at a dance. The woman wore a yellow dress and was laughing, her face bright with joy. The man beside her looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Runa recognized Halder's features in the young man's face. And the woman, that's Eleanor, Halder said quietly. That's how she looked before life taught her not to hope for things. Runa stared at the photograph. She'd seen pictures of her grandmother, but never like this. Never laughing. The Eleanor she remembered from her childhood had been quiet, dutiful, sad-eyed. A woman who moved through life like a ghost, present but not really there. I never knew she could look like that, Runa whispered. Neither did I after that summer. I kept the photograph because I wanted to remember her as she was meant to be, not as life made her. Runa touched the image carefully. She could see her own features there, the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. She'd inherited Eleanor's face, though she'd never recognized it until now. Why did you come back? She asked. After all this time, why now? Halder's expression grew somber. I'm sick, my heart. The doctors say I have maybe a year, maybe less. I wanted to put my affairs in order. I have no family, no heirs. When I found out Eleanor had passed, I started researching what happened to her family. Found records of her daughter, your mother. Found your name. And then I found property records showing someone named Runa Nash living on this exact land. You've been watching me. Not watching, just aware. I came here a few times over the years, stayed in town, observed from a distance. I saw what you were doing, how hard you worked, how you'd transformed this place. And I thought maybe this was how it was supposed to end. Eleanor never got to live here, but her granddaughter did. There was something right about that. Runa pushed the photograph back across the table. You had no right to make that decision without telling me. I've spent 15 years here thinking I'd found something that was mine. Now you're telling me it's all built on someone else's dream. No. Halder's voice was firm. You built this with your own hands, your own sweat. That makes it yours in every way that matters. The deed is just paper. I'm offering to make the paper match the reality. And what do you want in return? Nothing. Just to know that Eleanor's dream didn't die with her. That someone who carries her blood is finally living the life she wanted. Runa stood abruptly, walked to the door. I need air. She stepped outside, but Halder's voice followed her. There's one more thing you should know. The deed needs to be transferred soon. There are unpaid property taxes. If they're not settled within 30 days, the county can seize the land and auction it. Runa froze. How much? Over $8,000. I've been sick, forgot to keep up with payments. By the time I realized, it had accumulated penalties. $8,000. Runa had $3,000 in savings, hard-earned over 15 years. It might as well have been $1 million. She looked out at the land she'd thought was hers, the land that might now be lost to both of them, and felt the bitter irony of it all. Eleanor had lost her dreams to circumstance. Halder had held on to them through sheer will. And now Runa stood to lose everything because of something as mundane as unpaid taxes. The mountains watched, indifferent as always. That night Runa couldn't sleep. She lay in the makeshift bed she'd created on the floor, staring at the ceiling, while Halder snored softly in her bed. The numbers kept running through her head. $8,400. 30 days. 3,000 in savings. The math didn't work no matter how many times she calculated it. When dawn finally came, she gave up on rest and went to the locked box she kept under the floorboards. She'd avoided opening it for years, but now she needed to face what was inside. Old photographs, a few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her, documents from her previous life, a marriage certificate she should have burned, divorce papers that had taken 2 years to finalize, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, Eleanor's recipe book. Runa had received it after her grandmother's funeral, handed to her by a distant cousin who'd been clearing out Eleanor's things. She'd paged through it once, seen the familiar handwriting, and then put it away. It had hurt too much to look at, a reminder of the quiet, sad woman who'd raised her mother, who died alone in a nursing home while Runa was still trapped in her own failing marriage. Now she opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed, some stained with decades of use. Eleanor's handwriting filled the margins with notes about measurements and temperatures. But as Runa read more carefully, she found other things. Personal notes that had nothing to do with cooking. Made Bernard's favorite today. He didn't notice. 23 years married. Feels like a life sentence. Made this the day I said goodbye to hope. Runa's hands trembled as she turned the pages. This wasn't just a recipe book. It was a chronicle of Eleanor's interior life, the thoughts she'd never spoken aloud. Her grandmother had been documenting her own quiet despair, line by line, year by year. One entry near the middle stopped Runa cold. Bernard doesn't notice when I cry into the dough. He never notices anything about me anymore. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if I'd been braver. If I'd chosen love over security. Runa closed the book, pressed it against her chest. She understood now in a way she never had before. Eleanor's sadness hadn't been resignation, it had been grief. Grief for the life she'd wanted, the love she'd lost, the choices that had been taken from her. It mirrored Runa's own story in ways that were almost unbearable to recognize. She'd married young, to a man who'd seemed kind at first. Within a year, he'd become controlling. Within 3, abusive. He dictated what she wore, who she spoke to, how she spent every minute of her day. He'd controlled all the money, made sure she had no way to leave. For 12 years she'd endured, until one night when his rage had turned violent enough that she'd known it was leave or die. She'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the truck that had been in her name. Driven west until Montana's mountains had seemed remote enough, wild enough to hide her. She'd chosen Last Chance because it was exactly that, a last chance to build something that was hers, beyond anyone's reach, except it hadn't been hers. Not really. She'd been living on Halder Pike's land all along, building on someone else's foundation, fooling herself into believing she'd created something from nothing. But maybe that was the pattern that ran through the women in her family. Eleanor had lived in someone else's life, trapped by duty and circumstance. Runa had tried to escape, but had ended up claiming land that belonged to another. Even her freedom had been an illusion. She took the recipe book with her when she went to the boarding house later that morning. Halder had insisted on moving there once he was strong enough to walk, giving Runa back her space. She found him in the small room on the 2nd floor, looking out the window at the mountains. "I've been reading this," she said without preamble. Holding up the book, Halder turned, recognized it immediately. "Where did you get that?" "They gave it to me after Eleanor died. I never really looked at it before." She sat in the chair by the door, open to one of the marked pages. She was miserable. My whole childhood I knew she was sad, but I didn't understand the depth of it. She was drowning in her own life, and I was too young to see it. She made her choice to protect what mattered most to her. Halder said gently. Her daughter. My mother? Yes. My mother used to tell me that Eleanor was the strongest woman she'd ever known. I never understood what she meant. I thought strength meant being loud, fighting back. But Eleanor's strength was in enduring, wasn't it? In sacrificing what she wanted, so her daughter could have something better. Halder nodded slowly. Eleanor wrote to me once, years after she'd married. She said she'd made peace with her choice because her daughter was happy. That seeing her child thrive made the sacrifice bearable. Did it? Runa's voice was sharp. Make it bearable? I don't know. I hope so. Runa stood, moved to the window beside him. From here, she could see the edge of town, the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there was the land, Halder's land, Eleanor's dream, her own refuge. I can't lose it, she said quietly. I know legally it's not mine. I know I have no claim beyond what I've built. But I can't lose it. Then we find a way to keep it, Halder replied. With what money? I have 3,000. You have about 500, he admitted. My pension doesn't go far, and medical bills have taken most of my savings. Bridget appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. Couldn't help but overhear. You two need help? Runa started to refuse automatically, but Halder spoke first. Yes, we do. Bridget set the tray down, pulled up another chair. Then let's figure this out. Last chance takes care of its own, and you've both earned that courtesy. I haven't, Runa protested. I've kept to myself for 15 years. You've been honest, worked hard, and never caused harm. That counts for something. Bridget pulled out a notepad. Now $8,400 in 30 days. Let's talk about what's possible. Over the next hour, they discussed options. Owen Kelsey had offered to loan money, but Runa flatly refused to be indebted to him. Tommy had suggested selling timber rights, but Halder was adamant that the land stay intact. Bridget mentioned that the property had water rights through the creek that ran across its eastern boundary. Water rights. Runa leaned forward. What do you mean? There's been talk in town. A development company, Sutherland Properties, has been buying up land in the area. They're planning some kind of resort development, but they need water access. That creek on your property feeds the whole valley. Halder pulled out the old surveyor's map he'd brought with him, spread it across the small table. The property lines were clearly marked, and the creek ran through a significant portion of the eastern acreage, land Runa had never even explored. I bought this entire parcel specifically because of that water source, Halder explained. I knew Eleanor loved running water. Wanted her to have a creek nearby. Runa studied the map. The property was larger than she'd realized, nearly 300 acres. She'd only been using about 30 of it. If this development company needs water access, that gives us leverage. Could sell them an easement, Bridget suggested. Give them rights to use the water without selling the land itself. How much would something like that be worth? Runa asked. Depends on how badly they need it. Could be a few thousand. Could be more. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. Runa looked at Halder, saw the same careful hope in his eyes that she felt building in her chest. We need to approach them carefully, she said. Find out what they're willing to pay without seeming desperate. I can make inquiries, Bridget offered. I know someone on the county planning board. She might have information. After Bridget left, Runa and Halder sat in silence for a while. Finally, Halder spoke. You're fighting for this. That means something. I don't know what else to do. You could walk away. Start over somewhere else. Runa shook her head. I tried running once. It didn't solve anything. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. Halder smiled, sad but genuine. Eleanor would have liked you. You have her stubbornness? Is that what we're calling it? Among other things. He paused. I'm sorry I waited so long to tell you the truth. I thought I was giving you a gift, but I see now it was more complicated than that. It was, Runa agreed. But I understand why you did it. You were trying to give Eleanor something, even if she couldn't have it herself. And now we're trying to keep it for both of you. Runa picked up Eleanor's recipe book, held it carefully. Yes, now we fight for it, together. Outside, clouds were gathering again over the mountains. Another storm coming. But this time Runa wasn't facing it alone. The county clerk's office was in a building that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Runa and Halder sat across from a tired-looking woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, waiting while she pulled their file. "Property taxes on the Pike parcel," the clerk said, sliding a document across the desk. "Current balance is $8,400. Due in 28 days, or the property enters foreclosure proceedings." The number looked even worse in official type. Runa felt Halder tense beside her. "Is there any possibility of an extension?" Halder asked. "Given my medical situation, I'm sorry, sir. The county doesn't grant extensions on tax debt. The property has been in arrears for 3 years. We've already been more than patient. 3 years. Runa glanced at Halder, saw the shame in his face. He'd been sick, confused, letting things slip. It wasn't entirely his fault, but the county didn't care about circumstances. "We're working on getting the funds," Runa said. "We just need to know our options if we can't make the full amount." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "If you can pay enough to show good faith, sometimes the county will work with you. But I'd recommend getting as close to the full amount as possible. Once foreclosure starts, it's hard to stop." They left with copies of the tax documents and a deadline that felt like a noose. Owen was waiting outside, leaning against his truck. He straightened when he saw them. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad," Runa replied. "But we're working on it." Owen studied her face, then nodded. "My offer stands. I can help." "I appreciate it, but Runa..." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to marry me or sign over your firstborn. It's a loan between neighbors. You'd do the same for me if situations were reversed, would she?" Runa wasn't sure. She'd spent so long being self-sufficient that accepting help felt like weakness. But the clock was ticking, and pride wouldn't pay taxes. "Let me think about it," she said finally. That afternoon, Bridget called with news. She'd made contact with James Drummond, Sutherland Properties regional representative. He was willing to meet the next day to discuss potential water access. "Be careful," Bridget warned. I asked around. "Drummond has a reputation. He's slick, and he knows how to get what he wants." Runa spent the evening preparing. She studied the surveyor's map until she had every boundary line memorized. The creek entered the property on the northeast corner, ran southeast for almost 2 miles, before exiting at the southern boundary. Any development on the western side of the valley would need that water source. Without it, Sutherland's resort plans would be significantly complicated. That gave them leverage. The question was, how much? The meeting was at the town's only diner. Drummond was already there when Runa and Halder arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. He was younger than Runa expected, maybe mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit that looked ridiculous in Last Chance. His smile was practiced and didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Nash, Mr. Pike." He stood, shook hands with the smooth confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Thank you for meeting with me." They sat. Drummond didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I understand you have property with water access that might interest my company. I've reviewed the county records. Impressive parcel. Excellent water rights. We're aware of its value," Runa said evenly. "I'm sure you are. Let me be direct. Sutherland Properties is developing a resort and residential community on the west side of the valley. We need reliable water access. Your creek is the most efficient source. We're prepared to offer $3,000 for an easement allowing us to tap into that water source." $3,000. It was insulting. The land alone was worth 10 times that, and the water rights were invaluable. "No," Runa said flatly. Drummond's smile didn't waver. "I understand you might want more. I'm authorized to go to 4,000, but that's our ceiling." The answer is still no. Now his smile thinned. "Ms. Nash, let me be frank. I know about your tax situation. I know you're in arrears to the county. $3,000 would help with that, and you'd still maintain ownership of your land." "It's a good deal," Halder leaned forward. "How do you know about our tax situation?" "Public record," Drummond said smoothly. "I do my research." Runa felt cold certainty settling in her gut. This wasn't a casual business inquiry. Drummond had been watching, waiting for them to be vulnerable. The timing of his approach wasn't coincidence. "We're not interested in selling an easement," she said. "But we might be interested in a different arrangement, such as a water lease. We maintain control of the water source. You pay an annual fee for access, with terms we negotiate. $8,000 for the first year, $2,000 annually after that. Drummond laughed. Actually laughed. That's absurd. We could drill our own wells for less than that, could you? Halder's voice was mild. The geological surveys I reviewed suggest the aquifer depth on the west side of the valley is significantly deeper than standard drilling equipment can reach. You'd need specialized equipment, environmental permits, and there's no guarantee you'd find adequate water. Our creek is proven, reliable, and accessible. 8,000 is fair. Drummond's amusement faded. You're asking for too much. 3,000, and that's my final offer. Then we're done here. Runa stood. Halder followed, moving more slowly but with dignity. You're making a mistake, Drummond said. His voice had lost its friendly veneer. The county will foreclose on that land in less than a month. We'll acquire it at auction for a fraction of what we're offering you now. Then you'll have to wait and see what happens at auction, Runa replied. Oh, good day, Mr. Drummond. They walked out, Runa's heart pounding. She just turned down $3,000 they desperately needed, gambling that they could find another way. Outside, Halder leaned heavily against the building. His face was grey. Are you all right? Runa asked, alarmed. Just tired. That took more out of me than I expected. He managed a weak smile. But you did well in there. Didn't let him bully you. We just turned down money we need. We turned down an insulting offer from a man who's trying to exploit our situation. There's a difference. Tommy appeared, jogging up the street. Runa, I've been looking for you. I talked to some folks around town. I think we can organize a fundraiser. Maybe get a few thousand together if... Tommy, Runa held up her hand. That's kind, but I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's community. People help each other here. I appreciate it, but no. Tommy's face fell, but he nodded. Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll let you know. After Tommy left, Halder spoke quietly. You're going to have to let people help eventually. You can't do this alone. I've been doing things alone for 15 years, and look where that's gotten you. His tone wasn't cruel, just honest. Sometimes, strength means knowing when to accept help. That evening, back at her cabin, Runa found Owen's truck parked outside. He was sitting on her porch step, waiting. When he saw her, he stood. I heard about the meeting with Drummond. Word travels. Of course it does. Runa, I need to tell you something. Something I should have mentioned before. He looked uncomfortable. Drummond approached me 6 months ago. Offered to buy my ranch. Good money, more than it's worth. I turned him down. Why are you telling me this? Because he's been systematically trying to acquire land in this valley. Mine, the Peterson place, old Widow Crane's property. He's been patient, waiting for people to get desperate or die. When I heard he'd approached you, I realized. Owen's jaw tightened. He's not going to stop. He'll wait you out. Let the foreclosure happen. Buy the land at auction. Unless we stop him first. Runa felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about taxes or water rights. It was about a developer who saw Last Chance as an opportunity and its residents as obstacles to profit. What do you suggest? She asked. Fight, but not alone. Let the community help. That's what we're here for. Runa looked out at her land, at the fence posts she'd carved, the garden she'd tended, the life she'd built from nothing. Maybe Owen was right. Maybe going it alone wasn't strength. It was just fear wearing a different face. The town meeting was Bridget's idea. She'd organized it in the community center, a drafty building that served as everything from voting hall to wedding venue. By the time Runa and Halder arrived, the room was already half full. She recognized most of the faces, people she'd nodded to over the years, but never really known. Owen had helped her prepare a presentation. Nothing fancy, just facts about the land, the water rights, and what Sutherland's development would mean for the valley. Tommy had printed flyers and distributed them around town. Even Vernon Hayes, the town council chair, had agreed to moderate. But as Runa looked around the room, she saw the division. Some people wore expressions of support. Others looked skeptical or openly hostile. The promise of jobs and development money had split Last Chance down the middle. Drummond sat in the back row, flanked by 2 associates in equally expensive suits. He caught Runa's eye and smiled. It was the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. Vernon called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the Sutherland Properties development proposal and how it affects our community. Ms. Nash and Mr. Pike have asked to present their perspective. After that, Mr. Drummond will have a chance to respond. Then we'll open it up for questions. Runa stood, her notes trembling slightly in her hands. She wasn't used to speaking in front of groups. But Halder was too weak for this, and someone had to say what needed saying. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I'm going to be direct. Sutherland Properties wants access to the water source on my property. They've offered $3,000 for an easement. I refused because that water isn't just valuable to them. It's valuable to all of us." She explained about the creek, the aquifer, the geological surveys, how the water fed into the valley, sustained the ecosystem, provided for wildlife and the few ranches still operating in the area. If we give Sutherland control of that water, we lose something we can never get back. This isn't just about my property. It's about what kind of community we want to be. A man in the third row stood up. She recognized him as Carl Winters, who owned the hardware store. "All due respect, Runa, but some of us need jobs. My business is barely hanging on. Development would bring customers, money, opportunity. You've been living on that land for 15 years without contributing much to this town. Now you're asking us to sacrifice our livelihoods for your principles." The words stung because they held truth. She had been isolated, separate, taking from the community without giving back. "You're right," she said quietly. "I haven't been much of a neighbor. I came here broken and afraid, and I hid. That's on me. But I'm asking you to look beyond immediate profit to long-term consequences. Once that water is under corporate control, we have no say in how it's used or protected." Drummond stood, smoothly taking control. "If I may address some of these concerns, Sutherland Properties has a proven track record of sustainable development. We're not here to exploit Last Chance. We're here to invest in it. Our development will create 50 permanent jobs, generate significant tax revenue, and fund improvements to infrastructure. The school needs renovations. The volunteer fire department needs new equipment. We're prepared to fund both." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Drummond continued, his voice confident and persuasive. "Ms. Nash makes valid points about water conservation. That's why we're proposing state-of-the-art water management systems, environmental monitoring, and a commitment to sustainability. This isn't an either-or situation. We can have both economic growth and environmental protection." More approving nods. Runa felt the room slipping away from her. Then Halder stood. He moved slowly, gripping the back of his chair for support, but when he spoke, his voice carried. "I've been quiet through most of this because I'm not from here. I'm an outsider, with no real claim on this community's future. But I do know something about promises and what they're worth." He paused, catching his breath. 60 years ago, I made promises too. Promised myself I'd build something lasting, something meaningful. I bought that land with dreams of a future that never came. But I held onto it because some things matter more than profit. He looked directly at Drummond. "You talk about sustainability and environmental protection, but I've seen your company's work in other places. I've done my research too. 3 towns in Wyoming, 2 in Idaho. You come in, make promises, build your developments. Then when the water starts running low or the infrastructure costs more than expected, you pull back your commitments. You take the profit and leave communities to deal with the consequences." Drummond's face hardened. "That's a mischaracterization. It's documented fact," Halder interrupted. "I have the reports. The lawsuits. The broken promises." He pulled a folder from his jacket, held it up. "Anyone who wants to see them can look after this meeting." The room's energy shifted. People were listening now, really listening. "Before you vote to support this development," Halder continued, "ask yourselves what you're actually voting for. Short-term jobs that might disappear in 5 years? Tax revenue that comes with strings attached? Or do you want to protect what makes Last Chance worth living in? The land, the water, the independence." He sat down heavily, exhausted. Runa reached over and squeezed his hand. The meeting continued for another hour. Questions, arguments, accusations. By the end, no clear consensus had emerged. Vernon promised the town council would review everything carefully before making any decisions. As people filed out, a few approached Runa. Mrs. Chen from the library said she supported them. Young Danny Peterson, who worked at the gas station, said his grandfather's ranch depended on that water source, and he was grateful someone was fighting for it. Small gestures, but they mattered. Drummond stopped on his way out. "Interesting presentation," he said coldly. "But you're still going to lose that land. The county doesn't care about your principles or Pike's research. They care about tax revenue. You have 3 weeks, and you're nowhere close to having the money. I'll see you at the auction." After he left, Runa felt the weight of it crash down. Halder's revelation about Sutherland's history had swayed some people, but it didn't solve their immediate problem. They still needed $8,400 in 3 weeks. "That took everything I had left," Halder admitted quietly. He looked grey, exhausted in a way that frightened her. "We should get you back to the boarding house." "In a minute." He pulled out a folded document from his inside pocket. "I need to show you something first. I had my lawyer draw this up before I got sick. It was a deed transfer already prepared, with Runa's name filled in as the recipient. All it needed was Halder's signature and a notary seal. I've been carrying this for 6 months," he said, "waiting for the right time. I want you to have the land, Runa, not because of Eleanor, not because I'm dying, but because you've earned it. You've fought for it. But I need to know you want it. Not for me, not for your grandmother, but for yourself." Runa stared at the document. "Such a simple piece of paper to carry so much weight. Do I want it?" she said slowly. "I don't know. When I first came here, I wanted escape. Somewhere to hide from what I'd left behind. The land gave me that. But over the years, it became something else. It became," she struggled for words, "it became the first place I ever chose for myself. Not because someone told me to be there. Not because I was trapped. Because I decided it was worth fighting for. Then fight for it," Halder said simply. "But not alone anymore." Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Vernon Hayes caught up with them in the parking lot. "That was well done in there," he said. "Both of you. Gave people something to think about. Will it be enough?" Runa asked. "Don't know yet, but I'll tell you this. I've been on the council for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone stand up to a developer the way you two did tonight. That means something." He pulled something from his pocket. "Old military dog tags. These were my father's. He fought in World War II, came back here and built a life in Last Chance. He used to say that freedom costs something. Sometimes it costs money, sometimes it costs blood, but it always costs something. You two are paying that cost. I respect that." He pressed the dog tags back into his pocket. "Council votes in 2 days. I can't promise anything, but you made your case well. Now we'll see if this town has the courage to back you." As they drove back toward town, Halder suddenly gasped and clutched his chest. Runa pulled over immediately. "Halder, what's wrong?" "My heart," he managed. His face was ashen, his breathing labored. Need the clinic." Runa drove faster than she'd ever driven those mountain roads, praying they'd make it in time. The clinic in Last Chance was barely more than a first aid station, staffed by Dr. Reeves, a semi-retired physician who'd moved to Montana for the fishing. But he knew enough to recognize a serious cardiac event when he saw one. "His heart is failing, faster than expected," Dr. Reeves told Runa after stabilizing Halder. "The stress of the meeting, the elevation, his age, it's all catching up. He needs to be in a proper hospital, but I don't think he'd survive the trip to Missoula." "How long does he have?" "Weeks, maybe a month if he's lucky and stays calm. But honestly, Ms. Nash, every day from here is borrowed time." Runa sat with Halder through the night. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in fever dreams where he called for Eleanor. In one of his clear moments, he gripped Runa's hand. "The deed," he whispered. "In my jacket pocket, take it. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. We both know that's not true." His eyes were clear despite his weakness. "Promise me, whatever happens to me, you'll keep fighting for that land. I promise." He relaxed slightly, seemed to sleep. Runa found the deed transfer in his jacket and folded it carefully into her own pocket. The paper felt like both a gift and a burden. She left Halder sleeping and walked through the empty streets of Last Chance. Dawn was just breaking, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. She found herself at the county records office when it opened, driven by an instinct she didn't fully understand. "I need to see historical property records," she told the clerk. "For the Pike parcel, going back as far as you have." The clerk, a different woman than the one who'd handled the tax documents, pulled up the files. "We have records back to 1951, when Mr. Pike purchased the property. Anything specific you're looking for?" "Any claims or disputes?" "Anything unusual?" The clerk typed, frowned, typed more. That's interesting." "What?" "There's a notation here from 1968. A legal claim was filed against the property by an Runa Nash. Says she withdrew it before it went to court." The clerk looked up. "That's your grandmother, isn't it? Same last name as you?" Runa's heart stopped. "Can I see the file?" The full documentation took 20 minutes to retrieve from the archives. Runa read through it with growing disbelief. Eleanor had known about the land. She'd known about Halder's purchase. In 1968, 17 years after her marriage to Bernard, she'd filed a legal claim asserting that the property should rightfully be hers, based on Halder's original intent to give it to her. There were letters attached to the file. Correspondence between Eleanor and a lawyer in Missoula. Runa read them hungrily, her grandmother's words reaching across decades. "Mr. Pike purchased this land with the explicit intention of marrying me and building a life there. Though circumstances prevented that marriage, I believe the property should rightfully belong to me, as it was always meant to be mine." But 2 months later, another letter. "I must withdraw my claim. My husband has made it clear that if I pursue this matter, he will contest custody of our daughter. I cannot risk losing her. Some fights aren't worth the cost." Runa read the last line 3 times. Some fights aren't worth the cost. Eleanor had chosen her daughter, Runa's mother, over her freedom, over her dreams, over the land that should have been hers. The sacrifice was so profound, it made Runa's chest ache. But there was more. Buried in the file was something that made Runa go cold. A letter from Bernard Nash's employer, dated 1967. The letterhead read, "Sutherland Development Company." She dug deeper, pulling up more historical records. Sutherland Development Company had been founded in 1962 by Marcus Sutherland. It had gone through several reorganizations and name changes over the years, but the core ownership had remained the same. The current Sutherland Properties was the direct descendant of the company that had employed Bernard Nash. Her grandfather had worked for the company that now wanted her land. Runa requested more files, chasing a suspicion that was rapidly becoming certainty. She found geological surveys from 1965, commissioned by Sutherland Development. They'd identified the aquifer beneath the Pike property even then. They'd known about the water source for 60 years, and Bernard Nash had been part of that survey team. The pattern became clear. Bernard hadn't just been a controlling husband. He'd been an agent for corporate interests. He'd kept Eleanor from claiming the land because his employers wanted it. He'd intercepted her legal claim, threatened her with custody loss, forced her to withdraw. Eleanor had been fighting not just a bad marriage, but a corporation that saw her dreams as an obstacle to profit. Runa photocopied everything, her hands shaking. She had to show Halder, had to tell someone what she'd discovered. But first, she needed to understand the full scope. She spent the rest of the day tracking down more information. Called the county planning office, got records of Sutherland's current operations. Found the pattern Owen had mentioned. Systematic acquisition of properties in the valley, always offering just enough money to tempt desperate sellers. Always timing their approaches to coincide with financial hardship. They'd been patient, waiting for Halder to die, for the taxes to lapse, for the opportunity to finally claim the land they'd coveted for decades. By evening, when she returned to the clinic, she had a folder full of documentation that reframed everything she thought she understood about her family's history. Halder was awake, propped up on pillows, looking marginally better. "Where have you been?" "Doing research." She sat beside his bed and spread out the documents. "Halder, Eleanor tried to claim your land in 1968. Did you know? His face went slack with shock. No, she never told me. I thought, after she married Bernard, I thought she'd moved on completely. She didn't move on. She remembered. She tried to fight for what should have been hers. Runa showed him Eleanor's letters, watched his eyes fill with tears as he read his lost love's words. She withdrew the claim because Bernard threatened to take her daughter, Runa continued. But there's more. Bernard worked for Sutherland Development, the same company that's trying to buy the land now. They've known about the aquifer since 1965. They've been trying to get this property for 60 years. Halder stared at the documents, his breath coming faster. Bernard kept her from the land because his employers wanted it. Yes, this isn't just about development or taxes. This is about a corporation that's been playing a long game, using whatever leverage they could, marriage, financial pressure, legal threats, to eventually control this property. And now they're so close, Halder said bitterly. All they have to do is wait for me to die and for the taxes to foreclose. Patience finally pays off, not if we stop them. Runa's voice was hard. We need to get this land protected permanently, not just pay the taxes and transfer the deed. We need to make sure Sutherland can never get it, no matter what happens to us. How? Conservation easement. I've been reading about them. It's a legal agreement that restricts development on the property forever. Even if the land changes ownership, the restrictions stay in place. We can protect the water source, the ecosystem, make it so Sutherland's resort plans are impossible. That requires environmental surveys, legal fees, time we don't have, and money we don't have, Runa finished. I know, but Owen mentioned there are organizations that help with this. Land trusts, conservation groups. If we can get one of them involved. Tommy burst through the clinic door, breathing hard. Runa, I've been looking everywhere for you. Drummond's people have been around town. They're telling everyone that if you don't sell, they'll fight the conservation easement. They're saying they'll tie it up in court for years, make it so expensive you'll lose everything anyway. Runa exchanged glances with Halder. Drummond knew about the easement plan, which meant he was watching them closely, anticipating their moves. Let him fight, Runa said. We have something he doesn't know we have. Proof that his company has been manipulating this situation for 60 years. That Runa Nash was essentially their agent. That Eleanor was coerced into withdrawing her legal claim. This isn't just a property dispute anymore. It's a pattern of corporate malfeasance. Will that matter legally? Halder asked. I don't know. But it matters morally, and in a small town like this, sometimes that counts for more than legal technicalities. She stood, decision made. We take this to the town council. We show them what Sutherland really is, and we hope it's enough to turn the tide. Outside, night had fallen. The mountains were dark shapes against a star-filled sky. Somewhere out there was the land, Eleanor's dream, Halder's promise, Runa's refuge. Worth fighting for. Worth protecting, even if the fight cost everything. The town council meeting was scheduled for 3 days later. Runa spent every waking hour preparing. She organized the documents chronologically, made copies for each council member, prepared a presentation that laid out the 60-year history of Sutherland's pursuit of the land. Bridget helped contact a lawyer in Missoula who specialized in conservation law. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she agreed to review their case pro bono after hearing the story. This is exactly the kind of situation conservation easements were designed for, Patricia told Runa over the phone. But I have to be honest, the process normally takes months. You have 3 weeks until the tax deadline. Can it be expedited? If we can prove imminent threat to a significant natural resource, yes, the aquifer qualifies. But we'll need environmental surveys, water quality testing, ecosystem assessments. That's expensive. How expensive? Minimum $6,000. And that's with me donating my time. Runa did the math in her head. $3,000 in savings, plus the $6,000 for surveys and legal fees. $9,000 total. They were still over $5,000 short of what they needed, even if they somehow came up with the survey money first. The problem felt insurmountable. But she kept working because the alternative was giving up, and she'd promised Halder she wouldn't do that. Owen organized volunteers to help with the preliminary work. Tommy and 3 other young men spent 2 days mapping the creek system, photographing wildlife, documenting plant species. Mrs. Chen from the library researched historical records of the aquifer, finding references going back to the 1800s when the valley was first settled. Halder contributed what he could from his bed in the clinic. He contacted old friends, people he'd worked with over the decades, asking for any information about Sutherland Development's history. What came back was damning. A pattern of aggressive land acquisition, broken promises to communities, environmental damage that took years to remediate. But gathering evidence didn't solve the money problem. With 1 week left until the tax deadline, they were still desperately short. Then Halder had another cardiac episode, worse than the first. Dr. Reeves called Runa at 2 in the morning, his voice grave. "You should come." "I don't think he has much time left." She drove through the darkness, her mind numb. When she reached the clinic, Halder was conscious, but barely. His breathing was labored, his skin the color of old paper. "Runa," he whispered when he saw her. She took his hand, felt how cold it was. "I'm here, the land." We're still fighting. We're not done yet." "Good," he coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I want to give you something." In case, from beneath his pillow, he pulled out a small box. Inside was a gold locket on a delicate chain. Runa recognized it immediately from the photographs. Eleanor had worn it in several pictures from her youth. "Where did you get this?" "A friend sent it to me after Eleanor passed. Said she'd found it among Eleanor's things. Asked if I wanted it since—" He had to pause to breathe. "Since it had my picture inside." Runa opened the locket with trembling fingers. On one side was a tiny photograph of young Halder, barely bigger than a thumbnail. On the other side was a pressed wildflower, faded but still recognizable as Mountain Forget-Me-Not. "She wore this until the day she died," Halder said. "Even married to another man, even after everything that happened. She kept me close. The friend said Eleanor asked for it on her deathbed, held it while she passed." Tears blurred Runa's vision. Her grandmother, whom she'd known as a sad, quiet woman beaten down by life, had carried this secret love for 50 years, had held onto it even when she'd been forced to let go of everything else. "I want you to have it," Halder continued. "Not because I'm dying, though we both know I am, but because you need to understand what you're fighting for. This isn't just about land or money or beating a corporation. It's about honoring the people who came before us. The sacrifices they made, the loves they carried, the dreams they couldn't live but passed on to us." Runa closed her hand around the locket. "I understand. Do you? Because I spent 60 years holding on to a promise that seemed impossible. And you've spent 15 years building a life out of nothing. We're the same, you and I. We're both too stubborn to let go of what matters." He smiled weakly. "Eleanor would have liked you. You have her strength. The quiet kind that doesn't break even when everything else does." "Tell me about her," Runa said. "Tell me what she was really like." For the next hour, Halder talked. About Eleanor's laugh, which had been rare but transformative. About how she could identify every bird by its call and knew which wildflowers bloomed first after the snow melted. About her hands, always busy, sewing, cooking, tending plants, because being still meant thinking about what she'd lost. She loved running water, Halder said. Rivers, creeks, even rain. Said it was the only thing that felt free. That's why I wanted her to have the creek on the property, so she could listen to something free even if she couldn't be. As dawn broke, Halder finally slept. Runa sat beside him, the locket warm in her palm, and made a decision. She would find the money somehow. Would beg, borrow, accept the charity she'd been too proud to take. Because this fight was bigger than her pride now. It was about Eleanor and Halder, and all the dreams that had been deferred for too long. When Owen arrived at the clinic later that morning, she told him, "I need your help, the loan you offered. I'm ready to accept it." Owen didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." He just nodded. "How much do you need?" "Everything you can spare. We need 6,000 for the environmental surveys and legal fees, plus the 8,400 for taxes. We have 3,000 saved." So she did the math again, feeling sick. 11,400 total. Owen was quiet for a long moment. I can give you 5,000. It'll strain me, but I can do it. That leaves us 6,400 short. Then we find it. Come on, they spent the day going door to door in Last Chance. Owen did most of the talking, explaining the situation simply and honestly. Some people gave $20. Some gave 100. Mrs. Chen donated 500 from the library fund. The Peterson family gave 300. Even people who couldn't afford much contributed something. By evening, they'd raised another $2,800, still 3,600 short. With 5 days until the deadline, Tommy found them as the sun was setting. I heard what you're doing. I want to help. Tommy, you don't have money. We can't. No, but I have this. He held up a guitar. My grandfather's. It's a 1952 Martin. Worth at least $4,000. Maybe more to the right buyer. Runa stared at the instrument. Tommy, that's a family heirloom. I can't. My grandfather would have wanted it to go to something important. This is important, please. Let me help. Before she could respond, Bridget appeared with news that made Runa's heart sink. Drummond's filing an injunction. He's claiming that any conservation easement would violate existing development agreements with the county. It's a delay tactic, but it might work. The council meeting has been postponed 3 days. 3 days would put them past the tax deadline. If they couldn't secure the conservation easement in time, they'd have to pay the full tax amount just to avoid foreclosure. And even then, without the easement protection, Sutherland could resume pursuing the land through other means. They were running out of time and options. That night, Runa sat alone in her cabin, wearing Eleanor's locket, looking at the deed transfer Halder had prepared. All it needed was his signature and a notary seal. But what good was owning land you couldn't keep? There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Vernon Hayes standing there, hat in hand. Can I come in? She stepped aside. Vernon entered, looked around the small space with its handmade furniture and carefully tended order. This is a good place you've built, he said. Honest work, honestly done. Thank you. Vernon pulled out his father's dog tags, the ones he'd shown her after the town meeting. He held them in his palm, studying them. My father fought in World War II, came back here and built a life in Last Chance. He used to tell me that freedom costs something. Sometimes it costs money, sometimes it costs blood, but it always costs something. Vernon looked up. You and Halder are paying that cost, fighting for something that matters against people who only care about profit. My father would have respected that. I appreciate. I'm not finished. Vernon set the dog tags on the table. The town council votes tomorrow. Drummond's trying to delay it, but I'm overriding him. We're voting on whether to support your conservation easement and whether to help with the funding. I can't promise which way it'll go, but I wanted you to know that I'm voting in your favor. And I'm making a personal loan of $3,000 to help with the tax bill. Runa felt tears spring to her eyes. Vernon, it's the right thing. My father taught me to recognize that and act on it, even when it costs something. He picked up his dog tags again. This town was built by people who stood for something, who didn't always take the easy path. I think we need to remember that. After Vernon left, Runa calculated one more time. Between Owen's loan, the community fundraising, Tommy's guitar, and Vernon's contribution, they had enough. Just barely, with almost nothing left over, but enough to pay the taxes and cover the essential legal fees. They could do this. They could actually win if Halder lived long enough to see it. The town council meeting was packed. Every seat taken, people standing along the walls, tension so thick you could taste it. Drummond sat in the front row with his lawyers, confident and predatory. Runa sat beside Owen with Tommy and Bridget right behind her. Hilda was in the clinic, too weak to attend, but she carried the documents he'd helped prepare. Vernon called the meeting to order. We're here to vote on 2 matters. First, whether the town will support the conservation easement on the Pike property. Second, whether the council approves Ms. Nash and Mr. Pike's management plan for the watershed. Mr. Drummond has asked to speak first. Drummond stood, smooth and polished. His presentation was professional, full of charts and economic projections. He talked about job creation, tax revenue, modernization. Made Last Chance sound like a dying town that needed saving, and Sutherland Properties as the savior. Miss Nash and Mr. Pike have presented their case with passion, Drummond said. But passion doesn't pay bills. Passion doesn't fund schools or fix roads. We're offering this community a future. They're offering preservation of land that benefits no one but themselves. Then he played his trump card. Before you vote, I want you to know that Sutherland Properties has already secured agreements with 3 major landowners in this valley. If this project moves forward, we're prepared to invest $20 million over the next 5 years. But if the Nash Pike property remains locked in conservation easement, our entire project becomes economically unfeasible. We'll pull out completely. The jobs, the investment, the revenue, all of it goes away. The room erupted in whispers. It was a naked threat, but an effective one. Drummond was essentially saying, vote our way or lose everything. Vernon called for order. Ms. Nash, you have the floor. Runa stood, her legs unsteady. She'd prepared a speech, but looking at the divided room, she knew speeches wouldn't matter. Only truth would. I'm not good at this, she began. Public speaking, politics, convincing people. I've spent 15 years keeping to myself because I was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of trusting anyone, afraid of being disappointed. The land gave me somewhere to hide. But I understand now that hiding isn't the same as living. She pulled out the folder of historical documents. Mr. Drummond's company has been trying to acquire this land for 60 years. They knew about the aquifer in 1965. My grandfather worked for them, and they used him to keep my grandmother from claiming what should have been hers. They've been patient, waiting for the right moment. Now they think that moment has come. She distributed copies of the documents to the council members. This isn't about development versus preservation. It's about a corporation that views this community as a resource to exploit. They'll make promises, give you just enough to feel grateful, and then take everything that matters. The water, the land, your independence. Carl Winters stood up. That's a nice speech, but we need jobs. My store is barely surviving. Development means customers. How do I pay my bills with principals? Before Runa could respond, Mrs. Chen spoke from the back. Carl, do you remember the Peterson development in '03? They promised jobs too. Built a big box store on the edge of town. Half the small businesses closed within 2 years. The store left after 5. We're still recovering. That was different, Carl started, was it? Owen cut in. Or is it the same pattern we've seen everywhere? Big promises, short-term gains, long-term damage. I'm not speaking as Runa's friend. I'm speaking as someone who's been ranching this valley for 40 years. Once you lose the water, you lose everything. No amount of development money compensates for that. Vernon held up his hand for silence. The council needs to deliberate. We'll take a 30-minute recess. The wait was agony. Runa stepped outside, needing air. Tommy followed her. Whatever happens, you did good, he said. Stood up when it mattered. It might not be enough, maybe, but you tried. That's more than most people do. Owen found them a few minutes later. It's close. 3 council members are leaning towards supporting you. 2 are firmly with Drummond. Vernon's the swing vote. What's he going to do? I don't know, but he's a good man. He'll do what he thinks is right. They filed back inside. Vernon looked tired, the weight of the decision visible in his face. He pulled out his father's dog tags one more time, held them for a moment, then set them on the table in front of him. These were my father's, he said to the room. He fought for freedom and principle. When he came home, he built a life here because Last Chance stood for something. Independence, integrity, community. We've lost some of that over the years. Maybe it's time we remembered who we are. He looked directly at Drummond. Your company's threat reveals its character. Threats are what weak people use when they can't win on merit. This council doesn't respond to threats. Vernon's voice grew stronger. I vote in favor of supporting the conservation easement on the Pike property. I vote in favor of Ms. Nash and Mr. Pike's watershed management plan. And I personally pledge $3,000 toward their tax obligations. The room exploded. The vote was 4-1 in favor. Only Carl Winters voted with Drummond, and even he looked uncomfortable about it. The conservation easement had community support. The watershed management plan was approved. Last Chance had chosen principle over profit. Drummond stood slowly, his face rigid with controlled anger. You're making a mistake. Sutherland Properties will be filing legal challenges to this decision. We have development agreements with the county that predate this easement. We'll see you in court. Looking forward to it, Vernon replied calmly. We have excellent documentation of your company's 60-year history of manipulation and broken promises. I think a judge would find that very interesting. Drummond left without another word, his lawyers trailing behind him. The moment the door closed, the room erupted in conversation. Some people cheered. Others looked worried about the economic consequences. But the decision was made. Runa felt Owen's hand on her shoulder. You did it. We did it, she corrected. All of us. Over the next hour, people approached with offers of help. Mrs. Peterson said she'd organize baking sales to raise additional funds. Danny offered to donate his earnings from the gas station for the next month. Even Carl Winters, who'd voted against them, stopped to shake Runa's hand. I still think we need jobs, he said. But I respect what you're fighting for. I hope it works out. Thank you, Carl. The next morning they gathered at the county office. Runa, Owen, Tommy, Bridget, Vernon, and Patricia Vance, the conservation lawyer who'd driven in from Missoula. They had the money, just barely, and the documentation was in order. The tax payment went through first. $8,400, paid in full with a combination of savings, loans, and community contributions. The clerk stamped the receipt and smiled. Property is clear. No outstanding debts. Then came the deed transfer. Halder had signed it the night before, his hand shaky, but his signature valid. A notary had witnessed it at the clinic. Now it just needed to be filed. Congratulations, Ms. Nash, the clerk said. You're officially the owner of the Pike property. Runa stared at the document with her name on it. After 15 years of believing she owned it, then learning she didn't, now it was legally hers. The irony wasn't lost on her. The conservation easement papers will take a few more days to process, Patricia explained. But with the community support and the environmental surveys we rushed through, it should be approved without issue. Once that's filed, the land is permanently protected. They went directly from the county office to the clinic. Halder was awake, propped up on pillows, his breathing labored, but his eyes alert. We did it, Runa told him, showing him the deed with her name. The taxes are paid. The land is mine, and the easement is being processed. Halder's face crumpled with emotion. Eleanor, he whispered, we did it. We kept the promise. We kept the promise, Runa agreed. Over the next 2 days, Halder seemed to rally slightly. Dr. Reeves warned it was probably temporary. The body's last surge before shutting down. But Runa was grateful for any extra time. She brought him updates about the land. Patricia had confirmed the conservation easement would be approved. Drummond's legal threats had evaporated. Apparently, Sutherland's lawyers had advised him that a fight would expose the company's historical misconduct and wasn't worth the risk. They'll find another valley to develop, Halder said. Another community to pressure. But at least they won't get this one. At least they won't get this one, Runa echoed. On the third evening, Halder asked Owen to witness something. With great effort, he pulled out Eleanor's pocket watch, the one with the frozen hands, at 3:47. I want you to bury this with me, he told Runa, along with the photograph of Eleanor. I've carried them long enough. Time to let go. Halder, I'm ready, Runa. I've done what I came to do. The land is protected. Eleanor's dream is preserved. You have a future here. That's enough. That's more than enough. That night, Halder fell asleep peacefully. Runa sat beside him, holding his hand, listening to his breathing gradually slow. At 3:47 in the morning, he took one last breath and was still. Runa looked at the clock on the wall. 3:47, the same time frozen on Eleanor's pocket watch, the same time engraved on the locket around her neck. A coincidence, maybe, or maybe something more. A final synchronicity, Halder and Eleanor reunited at last, in whatever came after. She sat with him until dawn, saying goodbye to the man who'd given her grandmother a dream and who'd trusted Runa to keep it alive. When Dr. Reeves came to make the official pronouncement, Runa was calm. Sad but calm. He was at peace, she told the doctor. He'd finished what he needed to do. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new chapter. The land was hers now, truly hers, and she would honor both the dreams that had built it and the sacrifices that had preserved it. Some promises, she thought, are worth keeping, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs. 3 months had passed since Halder died. Spring was coming to Montana, slowly but surely. The snow was melting in the higher elevations, and the creek on Runa's property ran full and fast with runoff. The wildflowers Eleanor had loved were beginning to push through the thawing ground. Mountain forget-me-nots, wild lupine, Indian paintbrush. The funeral had been small, but well attended. Runa had been surprised by how many people came. Folks from town who'd barely known Halder in life, but respected what he'd stood for. Owen, Bridget, Tommy, Vernon, Mrs. Chen, the Peterson family. Even Carl Winters had shown up, hat in hand, offering quiet condolences. They'd buried Halder in the Last Chance Cemetery, in a plot Runa had purchased next to Eleanor's grave. It had cost more money she didn't have, but Vernon had quietly helped with that too. The headstone was simple: Halder Pike, 1927-2025, Keeper of Promises. In his casket, Runa had placed Eleanor's pocket watch and the photograph of them together at the dance. Halder had wanted to be buried with them, to carry Eleanor's memory into whatever came next. At the graveside, Runa had read from one of Eleanor's letters, the one where she'd written about choosing her daughter over her dreams. Some sacrifices echo through generations, Runa had said. Eleanor sacrificed for her daughter. Halder held on to his promise for 60 years. Now it's my turn to honor what they built, what they dreamed, what they couldn't have but refused to let die. After the service, people had lingered, shared stories, offered support, promised to help with anything Runa needed. It had been strange and overwhelming, this feeling of being part of something larger than herself. Now, 3 months later, the strangeness had faded into something more comfortable, community, connection. The things she'd spent 15 years avoiding had become the things that sustained her. The land had transformed under the conservation easement. Patricia Vance had helped Runa partner with Montana State University's Environmental Science Department. They were using the property as a research site for watershed management and native ecosystem preservation. Graduate students came regularly to take samples, monitor wildlife, study plant regeneration. Tommy had taken a permanent position as land manager. He lived in a small trailer on the property and handled the daily maintenance, fence repairs, trail monitoring, coordination with the university researchers. It gave him steady work and purpose, and it gave Runa help she desperately needed. The creek remained pristine. Without Sutherland's development, the aquifer was safe. Other ranchers in the valley had noticed the difference. Their wells were running stronger, the water cleaner. Owen reported that his cattle were healthier than they'd been in years. Last Chance hadn't died from rejecting Sutherland's money. If anything, it had found new life. The conservation story had attracted attention. Small ecotourism operations, hikers and birdwatchers, people seeking authentic Montana experience. Bridget's store was busier than ever. The town had even hired a part-time tourism coordinator. Runa had changed too. She still kept to herself more than most, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She had dinner with Owen once a week, a standing arrangement that had become something both of them looked forward to. Nothing official, nothing declared. Just two people who'd lived hard lives learning to trust again. She taught workshops at Mrs. Chen's library about sustainable living and self-sufficiency. Young women from Bridget's church group came to the property to learn about gardening, food preservation, surviving Montana winters. Runa found she liked teaching, liked passing on knowledge she'd earned through trial and error. On a morning in late March, she walked the property boundaries, a ritual now, something she did weekly. The fence posts were solid, many of them the original ones she'd carved by hand all those years ago. The garden beds were prepared for spring planting. The cabin was weather-tight and warm. She stopped at the creek, listening to the water rush over stones. This was what Eleanor had wanted, Halder had told her. The sound of something free. From her pocket, she pulled out Eleanor's recipe book. She'd been reading it regularly, not just the recipes, but the margin notes, her grandmother's secret chronicle of longing and loss. Today, she'd found a page she'd never noticed before, tucked in the very back. A loose sheet of paper, the handwriting shakier than the rest, dated a week before Eleanor died. To whoever finds this, it read, I lived a complicated life. I loved deeply, twice, in different ways. I sacrificed my dreams, but I never regretted protecting my daughter. If you're reading this, you're probably family. Know that the land Halder bought was always meant to be a place of freedom. I never got to live there, but maybe you can. Make it count. Make it mean something. Don't let fear keep you from living the life you're meant to have. Love, Eleanor. Runa read the letter 3 times, tears running down her face. Her grandmother had left her a message across time, permission to live, to love, to be free. She folded the letter carefully and put it back in the book. Then she walked to the eastern edge of the property, where she'd been working on a project for the past month, a hand-carved wooden sign, 8 feet tall, made from pine she'd harvested and milled herself. The letters were deep and clean, carved with the same tools she'd used for her first fence post 15 years ago. Nash Pike Land Preserve. Eleanor's dream, Halder's promise. With Tommy's help, they set the posts and raised the sign at the property entrance. It stood strong and straight, visible from the road, announcing to anyone who passed what this place was and what it meant. When it was done, Tommy stepped back and grinned. Looks good. Real good. It does, Runa agreed. That evening she sat on her porch as the sun set, watching the light fade over the mountains. Owen pulled up in his truck and she waved him over. He climbed the steps and sat beside her without a word, just comfortable presence. You did good work today, he said finally. We did good work. We, he repeated, smiling slightly. You're getting better at that. I'm trying. They sat in companionable silence, watching darkness fall. Somewhere in that darkness the creek ran free and cold. The land stretched out, protected forever, a dream preserved across generations. Runa touched the locket at her neck. Eleanor's locket, with Halder's picture and the pressed wildflower inside. Some loves endured beyond death. Some sacrifices bore fruit decades later. Some promises were worth keeping, no matter how long it took. She'd spent 15 years learning to survive alone. Now she was learning something harder and better, how to belong, how to trust, how to build something that would outlast her. The way Eleanor and Halder had built something that outlasted them. The mountains watched, eternal and indifferent. But Runa no longer needed their indifference. She had community now. She had purpose. She had land that was truly hers, not through legal ownership alone, but through sweat and sacrifice and the determination to protect what mattered. Some things were worth fighting for. Some places were worth protecting. Some promises were worth keeping. And some women, like Eleanor, like Runa, discovered that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to accept help, when to offer it, and when to hold tight to the people and places that made life worth living. The stars came out, brilliant and cold. Inside the cabin, the wood stove glowed warm. Tomorrow she'd wake early, tend the chickens, walk the fence line, check on Tommy's progress with the trail markers. The work would continue, as it always had, but now it meant something different. Now it meant home.